My name is Miss Lizzie. I don't ever smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some ditsies. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to rhyme. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Oh, welcome, guys. That's right. Miss Liz is back, and we are here for evening tea. This afternoon, we had motherhood, and now tonight we have from prison to purpose with Doug Smith, and we're going to be talking about his book as well and all of that good stuff. So if you haven't subscribed to Miss Liz on Spotify or YouTube or Facebook, all that good stuff, just go over there and do some clicking, liking, and all of that stuff, following, because all these tea times will resonate with you, I guarantee, because Miss Liz likes to go down those rabbit holes and get digging deep. So before we get started, here we go. Those rabbit little croaks in the throat, was I already talked to Doug about before we went live and before we came on. So we're going to get the disclaimer out there, and then we're going to get an incredible intro, and you'll get to meet my guests through a strong cup of tea. We do not serve a beverage. We serve real life stories on Tea Time with Miss Liz. So the disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz, myself, is going live using StreamYard. Please leave a comment during the live broadcast. Please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at StreamYard.com. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicated to sharing real-life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participants are responsible for using their own judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to the discussion. Some episodes may include sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotional triggering subjects. Listeners' and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of this discussion, you are welcome to contact me at my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. By choosing to participate in comments on or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is extremely voluntary. Miss Liz welcomes you to join the conversations with an open heart, and at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect those wishes, and we'll see you back when you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup of tea at a time. Now, let me give you an introduction on who is serving tea with me tonight and get that frog out of my throat. And we talked about kissing frogs this afternoon, and look, I got frogs in the throat. So tonight on Tea Time with Miss Liz, we welcome a man whose story is both raw and redemptive. A living testimony of resilience, reform, and the power of second chances. Doug Smith walked what he calls the Path of Rocks and Thorns, a journey marked by incarceration, pain, and battle with identity and worth. But beyond the prison walls, he found transformation. Doug chose to rewrite his story, turning a life once defined by struggle into one defined by purpose. Today, Doug is an author, public speaker, mentor, and justice reform advocate. His book, The Path of Rocks and Thorns, From Prison to Purpose, tells the unfiltered truth of his experiences and reveals the inner strength it takes to rise when society says you cannot. From surviving trauma to challenging broken systems, Doug now uses his voice to advocate for healing, second chances, and a brief in humanity that extends to those society often forgets. He is a powerful reminder that no story is too broken to be rewritten, and the redemption is possible for any willing to work through the thorns to reach the awakening. Please join me in welcoming a golden heart guest with a powerful voice of transformation, Doug Smith. Welcome, Doug.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. It's so good to be here.
Oh, you're very welcome, and it's an honor to have you here with us tonight. So, Doug, I had a good, big, long introduction. What did I skip and what did I miss?
That's great. The only, if there is a correction, the book is called The Path of Rocks and Thorns, Leadership Lessons from a Prison Cell.
Oh, I forgot to sell.
Yes, but definitely it's about prison to purpose.
So, Doug, I'm going to take you way back to when you were a little guy. So, who was Doug as a little guy and who's Doug now?
Wow. Well, I often think about that when I was, someone asked me, what would I tell my younger self? And I said, well, I would tell him that you and I are exactly the same. You just don't know it yet. You don't know how great you are. You're caught up in some sort of belief about yourself that's really not true, and it's really going to harm your life. But believe me, who you are is truly great.
So, Doug, let's start where the book starts, the beginning of the book, and how it came together, and the chapters and the cover, all that good stuff out there.
Yeah. Well, I just started it. I start big projects and I tend to finish them. And it occurred to me that I could write a book. I'd never written a book before. I'm a leadership trainer and coach. I work with a wide variety of folks, but I really specialize in working with people just like myself, people who have had histories of mental illness, substance use, trauma, incarceration. And, I've been part of a movement of people who have taken those experiences and done absolutely astonishing things with them in their lives. And I could write a book on that. And so I started the book and I realized I'm going to also have to contend with the fact that I went to prison for a reason. There was deep trauma, there was shame, there was mental illness, substance use, homelessness, ICUs, all of that. And it's impossible to just sort of lightly write a leadership book without really contending with all of those factors. So I just dove right in, and it was a tough journey writing that book, but I feel more healed having written it.
So, Doug, you talk about a lot of hard subjects, right, that we don't talk about in today's world. We kind of ignore it, right? We kind of turn a blind eye to it, like homelessness and addiction, mental health, incarceration. We don't talk about these topics. We kind of say, oh, okay, well, that person went to jail. We'll just leave them alone. That person has mental illness. Oh, well, let them deal with it. Homelessness, let's just turn a blind eye completely to that, right? So, how did you write in those forms of your story in the book?
Yeah, well, I try to be pretty frank and honest about what I went through, and I do that for a reason, and it's not for me. It's not simply for my healing. What I recognize is that other people are going through similar experiences in their lives where mental illness is beyond their capacity to cope, where trauma is overwhelming them, where they might be feeling suicidal ideation or even going to prison. And there's a lot of shame about that. And people oftentimes don't know the route to healing for them. So I think it's incredibly important for someone who has walked that journey to be open about that, to share what it was like and what the transformation was like for you, because I might be the only example of mental health recovery anyone has seen. So it's really important that I use that story on behalf of others.
So, Doug, what was the awakening in being incarcerated? That You were like, this was a transformation. This is time. My life has to change. I need to change the way I'm looking at my life.
Beautiful. Well, I think the thing more than anything that was destroying my life was shame, because shame was driving a lot. It was driving career destruction. It was driving mental illness. It was at the very heart of substance use disorder. So when I got to prison, what happened was pure subtraction. So what that means is that there was nothing in prison that could give me, it couldn't give me relief. It couldn't give me a sense of validation or a sense of self-worth. There was nothing in prison. Prison is the absence of all of those things. And what I realized was that my desperate need for like validation and things like that was actually destroying my career. And I was like, okay, so drug abuse was destroying my life. Now I'm completely free of it, right? And I get to experience my own life, my emotions, my motivations in a totally different way. So I'm not suggesting everyone go to prison to experience this great transformation.
You know what? It's a good time out, right? To really wake up and say, you know what? I
Yeah.
think I need to change my life.
Exactly. And I'm like, I'm free of these things, and I need to make a decision to never live my life based on shame ever again, right? Like I need to be rid of it and all of the destructive ways of thinking that go with it. So I made that decision in prison, and we have a saying here, my wife and I in our household and that's, we don't do shame in this family.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, Doug, I want to, were you ever diagnosed with mental illness at a young
Yes.
age, or was it when you became an adolescent or an adult?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I'm 56 years old, and I did have major depression as a child, but it wasn't diagnosed. So I had suicidal ideation, some clumsy attempts at suicide. It went unnoticed, and I didn't know how to ask for help. So I lived kind of a nightmare during my adolescence. So this is true of kids today, right? Their mental illness often shows up is pretty early, but it might manifest like 13, 14 years old. For me, it was 11. And, fortunately, we live in a different time where we can call it things. It's more normalized. It's less stigmatized. So kids can get help that I didn't get. But I do work in communities all across Texas, small towns, larger towns, big towns, and there's still lots of places where the stigma around mental health is gripping and destructive. And there's lots of kids who aren't getting help because they don't talk about it in their families.
Absolutely. And the reason that I asked that question, Doug, is because I'm in my 50s as well. And, 50 years ago, we did not talk about mental illness.
No.
It was pick up your pants and just move on. You're just being a rebel. You're just being a bratty kid. There was no diagnosis of understanding why we were acting the way we were. And there was a lot of what happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors back 50 years ago as well. So the trauma stayed within us. It wasn't in society. Maybe society knew about it or neighbors knew, but they never, kind of, oh, there's something, maybe they need that help or something. And I'm really big on bringing awareness to youth mental health. Is we have generations that didn't get that support, like yourself and myself as well. I was diagnosed when I was 12, but I only started receiving help for mental health when I was 26.
Wow.
So for those years between the age of 12 and 26, I had no support, no help at all. I was diagnosed at 12, but there was no support.
We have the same story. Wow. That's true. I had no diagnosis or help, and I became a frequent caller to the suicide hotline throughout my 20s, and it kept me alive. And when I finally did get help, and the diagnosis and the medication and therapeutic supports, I actually went to work at the suicide hotline and became a counselor and ultimately the trainer.
You see, sometimes our stories align, right?
Yes.
And we just met. Like I don't know Doug. It's like I've talked to Doug through email, but I mean, Doug, I've never met you personally, right? But our similarities, because of our generation, right? Back in the 60s and 70s, we did not talk about mental illness.
Nope.
You know, so there's a lot of generation out there that is our age that may be fighting with mental illness and still wondering, do I have it? Do I not have it? Do I just need to get over it because that's what we were told growing up? You know, so
Yeah.
what got you into the advocating of mental health? Is it because of what you went through?
Yeah. So, I was sort of a born advocate. I discovered after I worked at the suicide hotline, I ended up working in in a homeless shelter. I went to get my degree in social work. I absolutely fell in love with advocacy and policy, so started working at the Texas Capitol. It was some careers choose you. I was born to do social work and specifically advocacy. And so I've been doing that before prison, largely working on anti-poverty programs, workforce development. And I was an adjunct professor at UT Austin School of Social Work, teaching policy. So I was just a nerd. And during prison...
Me too. That's where we get the nerd from, right?
That's it. Yeah, it's just a complete wonk. But in prison, I had the opportunity to work in a program where we all wear white. So I said men or women in white, taught sexual assault prevention inside. So we became advocates for creating an environment where people were free to do their time and rehabilitation, free from the threat of sexual violence. So advocate inside a prison. And then when I got out of prison, after my reentry job, I went back into public policy, working at a criminal justice reform organization and working to end end mass incarceration in Texas, create opportunities for people post-release, and ensure that we have the right mental health supports, certified peers, mental health peers, and that we have access to services instead of handcuffs.
Doug, we have a question that just came in. Are there services and resources in prisons for men for sexual abuse that they've experienced through childhood?
There are not, and at least in the Texas prisons, there's not a lot of trauma treatment inside a prison. It's one of the reasons why people cycle in and out of prison and drug abuse, because they're not getting help with some of the underlying challenges like unresolved trauma. And so it's just really important for people to recognize that. And when you get out, to the extent you can, getting mental health treatment if you can't afford it right away because you don't have insurance, really connecting with certified peers or family partners. Depending on what community you live in, there might be clubhouses or recovery groups, things like that. But surrounding yourself with community is just so important, and it's a really good first step. But ultimately, trauma recovery, it's going to look different for everyone, but having a good therapist for trauma recovery is gonna be a game changer, particularly around childhood sexual assault, because that's a hard one to just sort of unravel on your own.
Doug, we have another question here for you. Do you feel that there should be resources and services in prisons for men?
Oh, 100%. There should be. So, I mean, for mental illness, you can get medication that's part of the 8th Amendment against cruel and unusual punishment. They do have to treat your mental health diagnosis, but they're not required to provide you counseling or anything like that. And I know some prison systems that might have programs for trauma, certainly not in the Texas prison system.
So, Doug, I want to talk about the word trauma because we don't talk about trauma, right?
Nope.
We hear the word trauma, but we don't talk about it. And trauma is the hidden, almost a hidden rock that outbreaks the addictions, the abuse,
Mm-hmm.
and that as well, right? It's not the addiction that the person is running from, it's the trauma that the person is running from.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
so how do you feel about that when you hear trauma?
Yeah, it's a bit overused, and I think the term, I do trainings on like trauma informed leadership, like how do you create an organization that's trauma informed, right? Where someone who might have hypervigilance related to trauma that might derail their career, how do you create an organization that is responsive and embraces them nonetheless? But even with that, the term trauma informed is sort of, it's people are beginning to resist it more, and I'm worried that we're going backwards when it comes to this term trauma, and it's really not all that difficult to understand. It's simply people who have gone through things that are way beyond their capacity to cope or understand, who did not get the support they need to process and heal. And when that happens, the trauma is incomplete. And so you continue to experience it when something in your life triggers it that's reminiscent of that time, because it's not resolved. It's really common, and it's not that hard to understand.
Well, it's kind of like the title of your book, right? The Rocks and the Thorns, right? Trauma
Yes.
and addiction is kind of like the rocks and the thorns, because the rock is there, nothing was ever chiseled away at that rock. So then the thorns come in and start picking at that rock and saying, you know what, I just want to numb it, I just want it to go away, but I don't know how to deal with it. So then the addictions come in, right? Either sexual addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addictions, you know what I mean? But it starts with that rock, and then
Yep.
the thorn comes in and it's just poking and poking and poking and saying, like, look it, I I
Mm-hmm.
I need help.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. The analogy, of course, it's a rich analogy. It's a parable that, the your connection with spirit is always available to you, but sometimes it's blocked. And so that's, sometimes it's swallowed up and suffocated by thorns, and sometimes it's trampled underfoot by rocks. And that was true for me. And I think of that in sort of the broadest term way of thinking about spirituality. I think what it means to me is that everyone was born healed. When I say a leader, everyone was born a leader, just with that capacity to create and do magnificent things in the world. We're all born to do that. And so it's not like something we have to earn. It just gets covered up with
Yeah.
life.
Well, it kind of goes back to our stories are our purpose, right? Our missions. We go through the journeys that we go through in order to be that purpose, that mission in the future. It's the
Mm.
past, the present, and the future. It's kind of like our T's, right? The past, the present,
Mm.
and the future. I'm a time traveler, guys. So, everything for me is the past is what taught us. And then the present is what educates us. And then the present is bringing us the awareness that, we can change our stories. We do not need to stay in that past. And the present is just getting us ready for that future of
Yeah.
change.
How do you mind if I ask, since you were open about your own mental health
Sure,
history,
you
like what's your recovery like? How do you keep yourself well?
writing. Writing
Hmm.
saved me. Writing, speaking lately because I've eventually started sharing my story, but writing has saved me, Doug. Uh, I wrote poetry from the age of maybe 9 years old because nobody wanted to listen, but the paper and the pen listened to me. So
Hmm.
that's that's what saved me.
That is beautiful. I love that. There was when my book went from, I always say a lark, like, hey, I can do this, to something really serious. I remember I was sitting with some really intense emotions, and I, was worried about my business. I was just like feeling a lot of fear, and it was all in my chest. And I remember that someone invited me to sit with the emotions, and so I did. And so I sat with them, watched what they did, how they shifted energy, moved throughout my body. And at the very end of this, I heard this voice, and I know it was 14-year-old Doug saying, Doug, write my story, do justice for me. So yes, writing is incredibly healing.
I like that. Do justice for me.
Yeah.
Because we never had that person to protect us, right? It was
Right.
the inner child that had to protect us. It's the inner child that has to heal us. Whether we go to resources or coaches or mentors or whatever, at the end of the day, we have to look within ourselves. We have to understand, do we want to stay in that trauma or do we want to move on? And trauma is a life journey. It's not 30 days I'm fixed, and
No.
it's like grief, right? It takes the wind out of you. You think you're over that experience and that loss, and then all of a sudden, boof, a song will come on or a smell will come, and you're like, where am I going with this, right? And that's kind of like what mental illness is. We feel like we're balanced, we're in this zone, and then all of a sudden we're up here, and then we're back down here,
Yeah.
and we're like, how the heck did that happen? Where did that come from?
Yeah. I've learned to have fun with it. I'm deep into
It's a
my
roller
own.
coaster, right? It's fun.
Exactly. Even today, I mean, I've done so much towards my own recovery, but even today I get triggered. It might be something, rereading my book was triggering. Like I felt nauseous and had out of body experience, right? Like those are trauma responses. But today I know what they are. So I just say, oh, I'm triggered. So I'm going to feel like I'm out of my body now for the next 10, 15 minutes, and I'm just going to ride the wave. It just is what it is. And, I think when you get into recovery, you don't really, yes, it doesn't control you in the way, it doesn't devastate you in the way that it does before. And you have this huge emotional bandwidth. Like you can just really handle the uncomfortable emotions.
We just had a question come in, and as a writer myself, I'm kind of curious. Why do writers write trauma stories to be triggered over and over again? For me, it was for healing. Like I knew I was going to go down that rock and that trigger, but what was it for you, Doug?
I love the question. It makes me laugh. I'm like, I don't know why I did that.
I just thought I'd trigger myself. I had nothing better to do, right?
I mean, it's valuable context. I went to prison. My story involves prisons. It's impossible to write a story of that experience and the important transformative lessons that come from that without describing the trauma. I think where people get stuck when they think about sharing their trauma is that it stops there, because sharing trauma can make you feel just as helpless as when you experience the trauma. It's the rest of the story that transforms it into something else. It's the decisions you've made, the insights, the shifts inside, and what happened afterwards. That's the part of the story that's really important. You write about the trauma so that you can share.
Well, I think it's deeply important that we are triggered when we're writing our own stories. because we're being authentic with ourselves, we're being real and raw with ourselves in that moment and saying, you know what, this is what happened, this is what I felt. So we want to take the reader along for that journey and kind of express how we went and how we felt, maybe what the scene was, maybe what the sound, the smell was, you know, kind of take them on that journey a little bit when we write our stories.
Have you had this happen? Because this has been happening a lot, where people, if you've shared about your story in books, and now that I've written a book, I get people contacting me saying I was writing their story.
Yes, I get that a lot.
Me too.
But I think it's the similarities, right? Because every story is different, but it's also always the same as well.
That's right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of writing for your reader. It's cathartic for you, and it can be healing. But I'm not writing a book about trauma and leadership and transformation for me. That belongs to the reader.
Let's talk about leadership, Doug.
Yeah.
How do you see leadership?
Oh, I think of it as a relationship with everything you're creating in your world. Right. And so leadership is so much beyond just, leading a team and things like that, although that can be the expression. I've worked with people who are not in charge of anyone, but can pick up the phone and rally 100 people to march on the Capitol, right? Just through the force of their own integrity, their own leadership, the way that people trust them. So leadership is it's a recognition that you're out here in this world creating. You're always creating. Every time you walk into a room, you have impact on people. When you smile, when you frown,
Absolutely.
when you write a book, it all has impact. And recognizing that you're the one doing that. You're doing that. And you can see it reflected back to you all over the things that you're doing that are just magnificent, and that life shows it to you. Or you're doing the things that are reflections of your shame and unresolved trauma, and life reflects that back to you as well. So leadership is it's deeply spiritual, but it's just a relationship with the fact that you create all the time, and you see it mirrored at you.
Absolutely. And the reason why I asked that question is because of your T, right? Because when I asked you to give me a T, the T you gave me was investment in others, challenge existing concepts, and look inside yourself first. So that kind of goes back to the leadership, right? Because in order to be a good leader, you have to look within yourself and have the confidence within yourself to lead the team, right?
Yes. Leadership is an inside out game. It is not something that, regardless of what others might say, it's not something that gets trained. You don't train people to be leaders. That you might teach people to become good supervisors or managers and things like that. You might teach them to do change management. All of those things are really valuable. But leadership, you're leading all of the time. And so leadership development is really about helping people to get self-reflective about the results that they're producing, so that they can be even more effective next time.
Absolutely. And that's what there's so much different misconceptions of leadership, like I'm the leader of the pack. And, I find that that's kind of cold because you're not leading others, you're leading yourself. And it's kind of like an ego trip, right?
Right.
Where a true leader wants to see the team grow, wants to see the community grow, wants to see change, and when we talk about change, we have to first start changing within ourselves first in order to lead that team.
Yeah, I think I can remember the day that I realized I was a leader, because I didn't have a sense of that. People had told me I was a leader. Even in prison, I showed leadership, but I didn't conceive myself as in that way. But I remembered I was working in public policy. I had a stack of I had this huge to-do list. We were getting ready for the legislative sessions, and I had 3 new interns. And I walked in, and they needed my attention. They needed to understand what their expectations were, all of that. And all I could see was my to-do list. And I said, here are some research studies you can read. I'm going to go work on my list, and then I'll come back to you at the end of the day. Right. If anyone's been an intern, you just kind of know that's the way that they just sort of slough you off. And so I got about halfway across the hallway, and I just froze. And I heard in my head, Doug, the time you spend investing in others is the best use of your time. And so I turned back around, and I went to that office, and I spent a half a day with them, truly helping them to get oriented to the work, share my passion for the work, get them meaningful assignments so that they could plug in. And, it took a lot of my day, and I had to work late to get my to-do list. But I did that the next day with my staff and interns, and I did it the next day. And all of a sudden, my list started to decrease because they're taking more and more of it because they're excited about it, and they're getting good at it. They're getting confident. And I'm leaving at 5 p.m., right? They're off doing magnificent things, and I leave at 5 p.m. because I've got a yoga class.
So, Doug, I heard you say the 14-year-old Doug twice now.
Yes.
So did something happen at 14?
Yeah, that was that point where I needed to get met, right? That it was that bad. It was the trauma was so awful, the mental illness, the alienation, the bullying, the sense of abandonment. My dad had left. Each day was sort of a waking nightmare. I failed 8th grade, but they passed me anyway. It was just an awful, awful time, and it's incomprehensible alienation. And so that's the kid who needed to be healed. But it's not just that kid, you know what I mean? There are 14-year-olds, boys and girls, who know what I'm talking about, that utter alienation. And so, this book is also speaking to them.
Yeah, because the reason that I brought up the age 14, and for my listeners out there, is we often talk to our inner child, the child who was injured, the child that experienced that most trauma at that age. For me, it's the 4-year-old Liz. For you, it's 14, Doug. You see what I mean? So we go back to that child that was injured the most, and we speak to that child, and we encourage that child to give us strength, and we're going to get through this. Thank you for the messages. Thanks for listening. Thanks for holding on for us, because we, as that inner child at that age, were ready to give up. But that inner child did not let us give up.
That's right. I have this might be a radical notion, but I kind of understand. I believe that if we focused on identifying kids who are feeling that sense of alienation, particularly in school, like if kids were trained to actually support other kids as peers, where we taught mental illness and, that we supported each other, I honestly and truly believe we wouldn't see school shootings. I think we'd see kids feeling a sense of belonging and doing things that they would never have the courage to do because right now they're just not met or seen.
I think it's deeply important that we start bringing these into the schools, right? Having these open conversations, and, having coaches, mentors, somebody who had the lived experience, not just the book smart, but had the life experience, and come in and share their stories like you are right now, Doug, and like I have, give that example of there is possible change, that you can change your lives.
That's
like
right.
if we go into the youths and the schools and we start saying you're a troubled teen right now, but in 20 years, I guarantee you're going to be an advocate, or you're going to be a mentor, or you're going to be a coach. Kind of experience, give them that life experience of hope.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This is where leadership comes in. This is so much. You mentioned the word identity. Identity is huge
Yes.
with kids. You, if you take a kid who is kind of wearing all the labels that people have put up on them and give them an opportunity to lead in some really important way, then you change their label. Their label is now leader. And kids, adolescents, young adults step into that very naturally. And it's transformative. You connect with a different identity.
Absolutely. Doug, you mentioned something about the 14-year-old, do justice for me. The
Hmm.
young 14-year-old that said that. And we had a question that came in and says, if you could rewrite the justice system with one key change, what would it be and why?
Early, meet people early, identify what's happening early. We, I work in, again, I'm on contract with what's called the Judicial Commission on Mental Health in Texas. And so what that means is that we go to communities across Texas and we work with judges, probation chiefs, we work with schools, mental health, reentry, principals and school safety officers, everyone. We bring the community into a room together and we have this conversation. What is it that we could do that would make a profound difference for kids and keep them from entering into the juvenile justice system or returning? And we identify priorities. Invariably, early identification is key. Making sure that kids get connected with the resources that they need early and making sure that the families get the services that they need, because oftentimes that chaos that the kids feels inside mirrors the chaos within their homes. So get there early. That would make a huge difference. On the adult side, making sure people have access to the mental health and recovery support and trauma supports that they need long before they wear handcuffs.
You just mentioned something, the chaos in the home with the chaos of how we react. No one's
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to that.
Yeah. There's this, there is this new specialization. It's been new as in like the last decade and a half, called certified family partner. In other states, they might call it something different. But a certified family partner is a family member of who has a child who has either mental illness, significant behavioral health challenges, things of that nature, who have had to navigate really complicated systems to get the help that they need and get the educational supports that the kids need. And what they do is then they get trained to provide support to other families who have similar challenges. And so now families are partnering, or family members are partnering with other family members to help them to navigate, to self-advocate, things like that, to actually advocate so that people aren't treated with stigma, because oftentimes family members are highly stigmatized, like they're blamed for their children's behavior, um, without really understanding the incomprehensible stress that family is under.
Yeah, there's a lot of good information that's going out tonight on this tea time, Doug. So thanks for sharing that. And thanks for the listeners out there that are listening and bringing your questions to the table, because it really does make a difference when we have that open communication, right? And that's why I love doing these live shows, is because you just never know. Maybe there's a kid out there or an adult out there that is suffering in silence. And these tea times is what they actually need to hear at this moment, right? And
That's
that's why I
right.
enjoy doing these lives and seeing who can actually tune in, and have that opportunity to ask these questions. Um, we have a couple questions that came in during the week, Doug, for you, and I'd like to get those out to you. You now advocate for justice reform. What do you believe is the most misunderstood about people who have been served time?
Hmm. That's a really good question. What's most understood? So I think that people again will wear the labels that we put upon them. So, and people who have been incarcerated will continue to wear those labels. So, if they were considered to be an offender, then they might call themselves ex-offender. If they were considered to be a convict, then they'll call themselves ex-convict, right? But they still wear that label, right? So, I think that when we welcome people home, which is critically important, we rarely do that. It's returning citizen. It's formally incarcerated, but I like returning citizen. So, I think that, that's one of the things we misunderstand. I think the other thing we misunderstand is that people incarcerated, right, once they've gotten out, their capacity to do great things, to lead, to become the very, very best employee is off the charts. And generally, when people invest in people who have gone to prison or in our home, you'll find someone who is so grateful for the job, so willing to work, to do whatever is necessary to succeed, and they will support the organization as best they can. So you hiring someone who's formerly incarcerated, you helping to find housing for someone who's formerly incarcerated, right? You'll find someone who become a true community leader and probably one of your best employees.
We live in a stigma world of individuals who go to jail, right? We put that stigma on them right away, like they're just done. Society is done with them. Where do you see the changes coming in today's world with that stigma?
Boy, that's a really good question. I do think that we're in kind of an exciting time because we've had conversations about reform, and they've been going on for quite some time, and it's been pretty bipartisan. I think I remember in prison reading about someone who was working for a really conservative advocacy organization in Texas who was leading the charge on criminal justice reform because he thought that this mass incarceration that we're doing is a violation of personal liberties. It's big government writ large. So, all of the work any meaningful work that I did on criminal justice reform was done on a bipartisan level, and that was state and federal. I think that we've had some backlash. Things like defund the police, and I think there was understandable outrage, racial outrage related to George Floyd and police shootings and overuse of force, over policing, and things like that. So it was an important conversation that we needed to have, but it created a wedge between people who were really interested in reform, and they had them. It became something that repelled people from the whole movement. And I'm hoping that we're on the other end of that backlash and that we can continue to have this conversation.
Well, it kind of goes into the question that I just asked you. We had another question come in and it says, many people struggle with shame and labels after incarceration. How did you begin reclaiming your identity and self-worth?
That's beautiful. Well, I was very fortunate because once I got a job doing public policy and advocacy, I learned that I could use my story really effectively. When I went to the microphone to talk to legislators, I could talk about this is what happened to me. And because of that, I had to make this decision. And this is why this piece of legislation would have such a profound impact. So I learned that my story, my experience was my most valuable asset as an advocate. And that caused me to feel a real sense of empowerment inside. And I realized I'm not going to let people paint me with the brush of
I like that.
my past mistakes. I wasn't going to do that any longer. I think if someone is formerly incarcerated or has had probation or anything like that, if they can get involved in advocacy efforts to create better opportunities for people in reentry or to reform prison or conditions, I think that there's going to be a lot of healing. There's going to be a shift in their own personal identity. They're going to feel their own personal power.
I want to kind of take what you just said, paint me with a brush. If I gave you a brush, how would you paint yourself, Doug?
Oh gosh. um, boy, that's a really good question. I don't even know how to answer that.
Would it
I
be a
try to
scenery? Would it be a mountain, a river? How would you paint yourself?
my happy place. I just got back from Fort Davis, Texas, which is in the Davis Mountains, and it's in the Chihuahuan Desert. My happy place has always been on a hiking trail, climbing something. And I remember when I did my first contract, like a paid contract as a trainer, and I did it in Seattle. I finished for the day and I caught an Uber up to a hiking trail, and I walked on the hiking trail and I said, this is incredible. I get to do the work I love and then I get a hike afterwards. And I said, this is living life as though it was a gift to my soul.
So you know what Doug's doing tonight, right? He's painting a picture.
Yes.
I just like to listen deeply when my guests are speaking, because I like to pull up those little nuggets and just understand, how we see things and how we share our stories in different ways, but in similar ways, right? It always goes back to this. We always connect the dots, right? We always come together. And that's why I just like to listen. And when you said paint me with a brush, society does that so often, paints us with a brush without knowing our stories, without knowing who we really are.
Beautiful. That's
You
right.
know, Doug, I'm going to lighten it up a little bit because we're almost at the end here. I asked you a couple of questions, and I asked you what your favorite color was, blue. So, and then when you're telling me about hiking, I'm just like, okay, where's the blue come in?
Oh, the sky. Oh my gosh. I went hiking in Colorado, and my wife makes fun of me for this, but we got up to about 11, 12,000 feet, and there was a lake up there, and I had brought my swimsuit, and I just said, excuse me, and no one knew I was going to do it, but I just splashed into the water, and crystal clear blue, freezing as can be, but it was magical. So yeah, when hiking, I think of blue lakes and blue sky.
I like the word magical, because
Yeah.
your story was a heavy story, right? And you shared it real and raw. And here you are magically sharing your story with the blue, the magic and crystal, crystal cold blue, right? And that's kind of like a jail cell, right? It's kind of cold, and it's, so what kept your mindset in a positive mind frame while you were doing at the time in jail?
Service, staying in service, teaching sexual assault prevention. I did groups in the evening for people who were being paroled the next day, and helped them to figure out how they're going to get their HIV medications. Help them to kind of think about where am I going to connect with resources, things like that. I did that for years. It was because I kept getting turned down for parole, but I'm going every night to serve these people who are about to be paroled. So that wasn't lost on me. But
So you're like, it didn't work for me, but it'll work for you.
Yes. And there was nothing I could do to get out of. I used to get all these certificates, like for all these little programs that I could go to, and I handed them to parole board and hey, look at all these things that I'm doing. And they're like, yeah, you committed 4 robberies. You're going to do a little bit more time. And so I kept on getting turned down for parole. I couldn't do anything to earn my release. So I just realized this isn't about the certificate. This is about my own mental health, and it's about serving others. So that's what I did.
So, Doug, I want to talk about the book because we're almost at the end here. So,
Mhm.
any reader that would read your book, what message would you like to get, and what would you like them to get from reading the book? And is it a story, or is there like examples? Is there exercises? What type of book is it?
Beautiful. Well, it's actually structured like Dante's Inferno, which was a book I read in.
Okay.
And yeah, so the whole metaphor is that you have to go to the deepest core of hell in order to climb again. And and as you go through each of these levels and you truly experience that thing that has been destroying your life or sabotaging your own happiness, as you truly grapple with that, what emerges from that is a different way of looking at yourself and the world. And you can then use that to go create something, right? I call it leadership. So everything gets turned, so everything that you experience gets turned into something else. So like I use the chapter that I label greed, and it was really grappling with the fact that, I had some real problems with integrity long before prison. And I talk about my father, I talk about stealing, I talk about a lot of those things. And as I go through the journey, I that sense of greed, of always sort of not having enough and willing to lie and cheat to get more, gets transformed. And what's on the other end of that is a desire to invest in others. And that's where that comes from. The other side of greed is investment. And so I talk about that, how you apply that in leadership. And then I bring in an example. In Dante's Inferno, he has encounters with people. Well, it's the same thing. I bring in people in my book who embody that principle. So like in the greed chapter, when we get to investment, I introduce readers to a man named Daniel Howe, who is absolutely brilliant, a reentry leader in Tucson, Arizona, who runs housing for people, who helps to provide housing and jobs for people coming out of prison. And when he realized that they're having difficulty finding a job, he started creating micro enterprises so that they'd have a way to work and earn a living. So he's just like the embodiment of investment in people. So yeah, that's what you'll find. And each chapter is like that. It's the thing that can be so destructive in your life, how it transforms into something else that you can use to become a leader, a creator
That
in the
is
world.
cool. Well, Doug, if anybody wanted to grab a book, where could they grab these books, and how could they reach out to you if they'd like to work with you and speak with you and have you as a speaker in their schools or universities?
Beautiful. Thank you for asking that question. My books are up on Amazon. It's probably the best way to find it. It's The Path of Rocks and Thorns, Leadership Lessons from a Prison Cell. It's in ebook and paperback. I'm still recording the audiobook, so you'll have to wait until November for that.
You'll have to come back and have another cup of tea.
Exactly. And to reach me for anything, if you have questions or you would like to talk to me about training, I do leadership training, or keynote speaking, I do that as well. You can just go to www.d-degree.com. D as in Doug, -degree like college degree.com.
And Doug, before I do my final closing statement of tonight's tea time, I found on your website it says it's already inside you. Let's find it. What does that statement mean to you?
It means that you're magnificent, and if there's anything in you that's getting in the way of you touching that, let me help you to move those things out of the way so that you can see it and step into it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for joining me tonight. I'm just going to give everybody a little recap of what we talked about tonight in the closing statement. I really want to thank everybody for tuning in from Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok, and all of those other platforms that are tuning in. Thank you for all the questions that came in. But tonight's closing statement, as we close this tea time, I want to honor the strength, raw truth, and unwavering courage of our guest, Doug Smith. His journey through the path of rocks and thorns reminds us that even in the hardest places, purpose can be born. Doug's story is not just about survival, it's about rising above shame, breaking cycles, and providing that no life is too broken to be rebuilt. He is living proof that the second chances matter, that redemption is possible, and that change begins the moment we choose to believe in it. To those listening, whatever walls you face, know that they do not define you. Like Doug, you can walk through the thorns and discover a life of meaning, justice, and hope on the other side. Doug, thank you for using your voice to bring light where there was once darkness. You are a testament to resilience, reform, and the power of humanity to rise again. So thank you, Doug, for joining me tonight on Tea Time.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Thank you very much.
And I will see everybody next week, Tuesday and Thursday, same time, same place. And check Miss Liz out. And we will do this all over again with two new incredible guests to bring you two powerful true life stories and their books and work and services. So until then, I'm going to wish you guys a beautiful weekend, beautiful week, because we're only Tuesday. Miss Liz is back on Thursday. And we will do this all over again, and we will share a cup of tea. Not the beverage, but real life changes and real life difference, one cup at a time. Thank you all for joining me tonight on Tea Time with Miss Liz.